The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Neutral and circular materials and products. I'm delighted to join by, well, all sorts of fascinating people within the room, but also a fantastic panel. And indeed, we've been kindly welcomed by MEP Jakop Dalunde on my right. So I'll just pass the word to you first off.
Thanks, Tahmid. I'm generally not in favor of silver bullet mentality, thinking that there's one solution to solve complex problem. Generally, it's a basket of them. However, digital product passports is actually one of those silver bullets in terms of supporting circular economy and climate action while handling biodiversity and resource scarcity. So I'm so delighted to have you all here in the room and also online to get some food for thought and interesting discussions on this very important matter. And my own views I will share with you them later today. Back to you, Tahmid.
Great, thank you. And thank you once again as well to also your team who have been very helpful and kind to support us with the event. So I just wanted to say as well, we've got, I think, a rapidly increasing amount of attendees. I think we're nearing 100 online, and that usually goes up a few minutes past the hour. So it's great to have everyone. And if we go to the slides, I will just outline a few things in terms of what we're here for today. So we are here for the launch of our exciting report in collaboration and working with the Wuppertal Institute, and we're delighted to have Thomas here with us. In terms of a quick look at the agenda, so we've got some fabulous speakers. So Thomas will give us an outline of the report with some time for question and answers. We'll be doing that a mixture online. We'll pass on the questions through me, as well as there'll be opportunity in the room, and we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. After that, we've got a business roundtable, both physical and virtual in our new worlds. So we've got Céline Carré from Saint-Gobain on my left, as well as we'll be joined online by Baijia Huang from ROCKWOOL Group and Jørgen Hanson from Hydro. Of course, you've just heard from MEP Jakop Dalunde, but we're also delighted to have Neale, who works at the European Commission as the advisor for circular economy, and we're really grateful that you've managed to make the time to join us. And then finally, we'll get a view from ECOS and Valeria Botta, who will be joining us online in the end. And we'll do our best to kind of have some time for questions. Just as a quick piece in terms of who we are in terms of the Materials and Products Taskforce that I mentioned. So this is a group of businesses that have come together viewing a real progressive mindset. So we launched this at COP26 in Glasgow. So this is the Taskforce for Climate Neutral and Circular Materials and Products. We're delighted as well that Jakop could be a part of our launch event. And, you know, this was our vision to bring together a group of businesses that really wanted to actively commit to using climate neutral and sustainable materials, but also advocate them. And, you know, something like the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation and through that the digital product passport is actually a really key and amazing way to do it. So delighted to be able to launch this report and also be supported by our businesses and, of course, the Wuppertal Institute. So with that, I will pass to Thomas, who I will also pass the clicker. And I think the next slide is yours. Yes, there you are. Over to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Tahmid. Yeah, my name is Thomas Götz. I'm co-head of the research unit Energy Policy at Wuppertal Institute in Germany. And we have been working a lot with eco-design and also most recently, of course, on the digital product passport. So we're very happy to have the possibility to have this report together with the colleagues from Cambridge and the other organizations. Therefore, first of all, some words again. Tahmid already mentioned before in the background of the report. We did it together with the colleagues from Institute for Sustainability Leadership of the University of Cambridge, together with the Wuppertal Institute, was commissioned by the CO2 Europe Taskforce for Climate Neutral Materials and Products. And so I have to click the next one. And of course, the purpose of the report is threefold. First of all, as we heard before, we would like to focus at least especially on the business perspective on product passports and how they might be operating in practice. Then also the steps which need to be taken next to implement them. And together we would like also to contribute to general discussion on what is called by the EU a digital and green twin transition to cope with the upstanding challenges. So therefore, I would like also give you a short overview what you can expect when you have a look at the report directly later on or had already. It comprises, first of all, an extensive literature review, which gives you an overview of the scientific and relevant literature dealing with product passports at the moment. Then we also summarize and gave an overlook of the relevant policies, but also related initiatives, which are dealing not maybe directly with the digital product passport, but very similar approaches, which could be linked with that. And then, of course, the core of the report is then the discussion with the business representatives, and there we will present you the respective outcomes. And finally, based on that, of course, we have conclusions and recommendations for the further implementation of the product passport. Yeah, so much on the background. First of all, also it's always good to have a definition at the beginning when they talking about digital product passports, because there are also other approaches which are similar, but we are talking here, especially in the context, as also defined by the European Commission. So we summarize it here again. First of all, we're talking here, that's a product-specific data set that can be electronically accessed by means of data carrier. I think you should read it, but it's a bit formatting. So this means there can be also, for example, a QR code linking to the actual data in the product passport later on. And this is especially the core, the electronically to register the data of products, process them, which allows also the sharing of them with all relevant stakeholders from business over authorities to the end consumers. And therefore, it has also the clear directive and distinction to give information on the origin, composition, or repair possibilities of products. A lot of other things could be also included, but in terms of circular economy, of course, it goes up to recycling and potential disposal end of life. So all this should be included in the product passport. And so also we also have to discuss again why it is actually needed to have such a product passport. And here we have this illustration taken up. It's also shown similarly by the Commission. It's based on the illustration by the Ministry of Economy of Luxembourg, and together with the product circularity data sheet, but the intention is very similar. What we can see on this illustration is typically a linear data flow in current industry systems, which means when we start from left-hand side, that we have manufacturers or of components or raw materials and so on. They all collect data and process them, but typically they are not handed over to the next in the chain of supply. And when it comes to the producer or at latest at the distributor, most of this information is already lost or it's not available. And it's getting even worse when you talk about consumers. So they have very little information from the beginning of the value chain, and for recyclers at the end, it's really challenging if they don't have the respective data to recycle products. So exactly there, the product passport will kick in, and is intended to solve this. And also to give you again a short look back on the policy evolution leading our discussion today. This already started back in 2013 with first discussions on product passports, but also the environmental footprint aspects and so on. And yeah, for many years it's going on, but then in 2019 it really gained really momentum with the European Green Deal, where it was specifically mentioned, as I think all of you know. And then beginning after 2020, you see there's only a very small part of the things going on. A lot of initiatives and policies have been starting up, most prominently, for example, is new circular economy action plan, which mentions directly the product passport. Or we have the battery regulation, which includes a battery passport, which is essentially a product-specific product passport, which is very similar. And then all of most prominently, of course, this year, 2020, end of March, you know, Commission has launched its sustainable, formerly called Sustainable Product Initiative, and therefore the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation proposal, the Construction Product Regulation and proposal, and the Strategy for Circular Textiles. And all of them comprise the product passport. Sometimes it's mentioned a bit different, but more or less they refer all to the product passport. And fitting to that, also the Digital Europe work program also shows and requires to have first prototypes of this, and beginning in 2023. I think the project was recently commissioned, so 2023, 2024, there should be first prototypes of product passports, starting with electronics, at least, meaning consumer electronics, batteries, as mentioned before, from the batteries passport, and at least one other product group, which is defined in the Circular Economy Action Plan, which could be, for example, energy or material intensive basic materials, but a lot of other things, of course, are also possible, like textiles and so on. Okay, so that's the background we're talking about. Then, yeah, I mentioned before, we did a lot of interactive discussions with business representatives. Therefore, we performed a workshop with, for example, the members of the Steel to Europe Taskforce for climate neutral materials and products, but also other identified businesses across different sectors. So we were covering starting from aluminium and steel material production, over insulation and construction material manufacturers, or consumer goods and lighting, and even also, for example, later at the value chain from retail design or development of digital solutions. And yeah, what we present you today is the combined output of that. So what we can say in general, from more or less the majority of all business representatives, it was highly welcome to have an approach like the digital product passport, because it's really seen as the key instrument to modernize and digitalize product information, and to support by this means the industry transformation, which is a very, very big thing coming up in all the different sectors. Because carbon neutrality and circularity have to be achieved at the same time, which is makes it even more challenging, of course. So that means business have very strong belief that when it's finalized, it can also have a very big benefit for the consumers to have access also to relevant data for them. And of course, this means, again, when consumers demand for it, it creates a lot of incentives for manufacturers all over the value chain to produce more sustainable products and improve their general value chain. So together with that, of course, we have discussed different aspects. So we also heard some concerns, of course, also from the business, which is related to that and to the uncertainty at the moment. In particular, business still ask and looking forward to the question, which product or what product groups will actually be covered by the product passport? Because that's still to be determined by, for example, the ESPR Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation later on. And then it comes to the question, which and what data amounts should be collected and contained in the product passport, and at which levels of transparency it just envisaged. Together with granularity, this means how public it will be, how secret it will be, and that is, of course, very strongly linked to the concerns of industries that intellectual property rights shall not be compromised while achieving transparency still at the same time. So that's, of course, a very big point to be discussed on. And but nevertheless, we have seen especially the benefits are absolutely prevailing, which are seen from the business representatives, because for the first time it is seen as a possibility that really reliable and comparable information on products will become available for business, but also for other stakeholders like policymakers and the consumers. So that means transparency and at the same time also traceability and consistency, which is also not covered at the moment because very global and complex value chains, and it's really hard for business also to follow up with all the products. So by this means the product passport could be also, when it's implemented in a very straightforward way, that it can be a supportive tool for industry, which could also help them to report their sustainability indicators, which they already have to report, but often using a lot of different systems. So there are hopes that the product passports can help to bring together all these reporting duties and ease it up. And when this is achieved, also it can be a tool that would allow really innovative thinking of new business models, which are not there at the moment or not possible. So therefore, it's seen really as an enabler tool. Yeah, that's already mentioned here. It's not only maybe for new business models an enabler, it could be also an enabler for green markets, or what is called, sometimes also called green lead markets when we look at the EU, because now the EU is clearly the front runner in this discussion, and it's a big opportunity to form also the worldwide discussion, because it's a global value chain we have to look at. And so the EU has now the opportunity to set more or less the standard for such product passports and be a really green lead market again. And therefore, it's also important because it can be a key driver for investments later on. It's not only for business or consumers, but it goes up public procurement and so on. And all their instruments like the product passport is needed to really make criteria that are comparable and fair for all the participants. And last but not least, so we have also to deal with, address with product liability challenges, which are often in the industry, which could be dealt with in this product passport by making the different businesses comparable with each other. And that's also often seen as very important and supportive for business. And lastly, then we learned, unfortunately, this year even more, security of supply is a big concern and should be always in the focus when it comes to where materials and resources are coming from. Therefore, the product passport can also be a tool that supports resilience against external shocks, for example, when manufacturers exactly know where the products are coming from. And if there's a crisis of availability, this could be very relevant for resilience for respective markets. So it could be also very high on the agenda topic for this. Yeah, then we also come to the conclusion and recommendations, and we structured in 3 parts. The first part is what we call coherence and consistency, which means, first of all, that was a very big point from all the representatives. The industry would really welcome it if all the forthcoming EU regulations would be linked as much as possible with the DPP as envisaged in the ESPER and Eco-Design Sustainable Product Regulation. So meaning not to create different approaches, which might be called product passports, but actually would be different. So they really would prefer one, let's say, in a general system and approach and the wording, one approach that could be transferred to the other product groups. Of course, that's linked also in terms of the IT infrastructure. That would be, of course, ideal if it would be a general infrastructure that could be transferred and is flexible to other product groups. And very important, it should be interoperable and compatible with existing systems, meaning in terms of policy instruments when we think about mandatory databases, but also when we think about already existing data systems in the industry, there should be clearly the respective interoperability and compatibility with that. And by this means, there are big hopes that the EU can take especially create an enabling environment to create such a DPP ecosystem by providing the respective guidelines and the common standards, so that all the involved stakeholders talk about the same thing. And therefore, it's also recommended that the discussion is also dealt with all the existing international initiatives, meaning there are a lot of initiatives not dealing directly with the product passport, but for example with carbon neutrality and discussions on greenhouse gas reporting and so on. And there are a lot of initiatives which require electronic systems or data systems, which are very similar, also not named product passport at the moment. But of course, it should be talked with them and seen where overlaps to avoid the respective duplication of efforts, and not to create a lot of different new systems, but really try to be harmonized as much as possible. Furthermore, also we heard then in this context, there would be very welcomed if there would be also the possibility for additional voluntary data sharing, meaning beyond maybe mandatory requirements, there should be at least technically the possibility also to share voluntary information by business if they want to show their special benefits and environmental sustainability benefits of their products. Okay, so that was the first part, and the second part of the conclusions recommendations we called flexibility and exploration. And there was also a big common understanding from industry representatives to require or recommend it's better to start small with such complex technical developments and modestly, but very promptly, so that we can have, let's say, iterative learning, and which is more like a phased approach, meaning which has the possibility for continuous evolution and extension, and have an iterative learning like is already today in very proactive IT development is the standard case. So it should be done also with the product passport. So not to wait until everything is developed to the perfect, but really start and try and improve continuously. So that's also recommended to start with clearly defined products for this, which you can say it's good for testing, but also later the learning could be transferred to other maybe more complex product groups. And then it brings us also to the point of detailed data. So in contrast, when we talk about the IT system, that should be, of course, transferable to other product groups. But the detailed data, specific data for a product, that should be really product group specific. Because when the target is to have reliable information and comparable information, it's important that there can be not one size fits all. So as already envisaged more or less in the ESPA regulation, there needs to be product-specific information, which information should be contained in the product passport. Yeah, and also lastly, that's also linked to that, the big industry clearly favors from the different options, clearly a decentralized approach for the data storage and for data entering. So meaning not to create one big, huge database, which might be very hard to implement and to operate. So really you have a decentralized data storage and entering approach. With a lean, centralized, maybe as envisaged in the ESPA, there's also a lean overview only intended. So that's also recommended by the industry. So then we're also coming to the last part of conclusions, which we call the transparency and accountability. Then when it comes to the detailed data in the product passport, it was seen as most important. The data is clearly selected to be relevant and fit for purpose, which means data should not be just collected for itself and just for the task of collecting data as much as possible, but rather to be clear on scope, which are the most essential data, which are helpful for the stakeholders in the value chain, and had to have actually a concrete benefit for them along the product life cycle. And that's also important because when we come back to the point of IPR, that's of course it's also foreseen to have different levels of data access, which ensures on the one hand data protection of IPR, which is for business very important, but to allow transparency as the default. That's also the wish of the majority of our industry representatives, that transparency should be the default, but without infringing the legitimate IPR concerns, which are of course especially relevant for leading European industries, which already created a lot of assets in terms of sustainability development. And lastly, we came therefore also to the implementation. There it's recommended to do the actual technical implementation of such a product passport systems by means of what is called trusted intermediaries, which means institutions that have the technical expertise to implement product passports, but also have the greater understanding of the wider impacts and the policy aims, and have so the ability to create such systems which are neutral and, as we mentioned, interoperable and compatible. Yeah, and with that, I'm already finishing my presentation. Now looking forward to any questions and to the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Thomas, and thank you from me as well for all the work from Wuppertal. We didn't give easy deadlines, but here we are. And I just wanted to highlight as well, on each agenda, you will see there is a QR code that you can scan to get the report. It's publicly available on our website. For those on GoToWebinar, of which there are currently 157, which is fantastic. there is a you can look at the handouts, and the report is there as well. So we have a bit of time for questions. I think Jakop, you mentioned you had one, so I'll maybe pass to you first. And a polite question. We don't have so much time, so if we can keep Q&A quite succinct, that would be much appreciated.
Thanks, Tahmid, and thanks, Thomas, for the excellent report and presentation. I wonder which of the recommendations require the most deliberations in terms of weighing pros and cons. That's the first question. And second question, which do you think will be the primary reservations from the stakeholders to who will have to follow these? I imagine that intellectual property might be one of them. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. That would absolutely agree with that. I think that will be, I think, clearly the major challenge for all stakeholder groups, because industry has the legitimate interest in IPR protection, but we all have also, of course, from consumer organization and so on, all they have specific data needs. And I think this discussion should be really started very early to see what are the actual data needs of the respective actor groups, to select them clearly and implement them and consider them already for the technical development, because it's also needed to know how could such a system be, which is a big challenge, of course, but it should be operable at the end of the time, because it means consumers would also have to use it. So what is sometimes called a need-to-know principle, meaning the technical system has to allow different access levels, but also regarding the data that's contained therein, there should be clearly defined before in stakeholder discussions which data should be there, and it should be fit for purpose and on the point and not overwhelming all the stakeholders. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I got there's one question online, and then I think we'll have time maybe for one or two more if there are also any in the room. So this is from Neale Avila, and apologies if I said that wrong. So it was just a question around with the passport, is it possible to reach programs related to carbon credits? And I think it's referring particularly around the carbon credit exchange program. So I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It links also to the point I mentioned before regarding different initiatives going on. And we had the report, it was really a surprise how many other initiatives are going on at the moment in terms of international stakeholder discussions with going from governor, from respective public authorities, private initiatives, and they deal all with systems. For example, let's say the bigger topic of greenhouse gas reporting and evaluating greenhouse gases. And there are not really comparable standards even for that relatively easy task at the moment. And this brings us to the point, all these initiatives dealing, for example, even with greenhouse gas reporting, bring them really together. It would be very important so that when creating new standards, that talking about the same thing, and because all of them talking about electronic systems which deal, for example, greenhouse gas data. And of course, we should not create a lot of reinventing the wheel a lot of times. And I think that's exactly the same point here. When we have one clearly defined approach how to define greenhouse gases, we have all talking about the same unit and how it is measured in industry, 1 ton of greenhouse gases, for example, and then it can be compared. And if this could be achieved at a product passport, it could be a really big step forward.
Great, thank you. And is there anyone in the room that might want to pose a question? If not, we have another one online. So this is from Harry Vahar from Signify. Signify, we fully support the DPP. The question is how to enable a pragmatic approach for broad and dynamic product portfolios. So, for something like LED lighting products, so ranges can be wide and innovation is ongoing. So to what extent, how can you make a DPP process that is not too time and cost intensive?
Yeah, that's also a very good point because, it is a question where to start with the product passport. And also refer to the ESPO regulation, Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation, mentions a product passport can start a batch specific, it can be item specific, and in between more or less. So I think that is exactly to be part of the stakeholder discussions. Of course, there are products which are suitable to have item-specific, very detailed passports, and the battery passport is the most prominent example of that. You have high-value, for example, automotive batteries. These are very costly, big products, and it makes sense that they go on an item level of the product. But of course, you have a lot of mass product systems which might be possible to have every single product exactly inside, but you have to deal with it on a batch level or bigger level. And even beyond that, of course, it has still to be decided which product groups will be, let's say, eligible for this European product passport. It still has to be decided. But of course, it should be open to to extend it to also to new product groups, and that will be part of the stakeholder discussion, I think.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Anyone in the room? Okay, we've got one more. Let's do one more question. So this is by Casper Sanchez. So how and by whom is the DPP maintained throughout the product lifetime? So who is the owner of the digital product passport?
Yeah, that's also a very good point. As we've seen, also the EU plans now to be, let's say, to have the governance over the product passport. Also, our understanding is it will not, let's say, operate it on its own or develop it its own, but rather it will mandate respective, what we call now this trusted intermediaries, or let's say independent organizations, also private organizations, to develop the technology behind it, as it's done usually by service contracts at the moment. That's also our understanding. Maybe we can hear later on a bit on that, but I think that's also where, from the practice, what you've seen as most feasible. Maybe that still has to be discussed. Will there be only one operator of it, or will be maybe there several operators the stakeholders can choose from? That's still a question that could be open. So we think that first there will be a development of these prototypes, as we've seen in this Digital Work Europe program, and maybe after that we know, but because 3 prototypes are developed at the moment, we assume that will be several stakeholders able to do this. And so we trust that, especially when we have these trusted intermediaries which have the technical expertise and know how it is implemented for such thing, that is feasible.
Great. I think we've got time for one more. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Sasha. Do you want to put on your microphone? Yes.
I think the question that came from online for Thomas was also about who's responsible for maintaining the product passport for a specific product. Do you expect the producer to be responsible, or all the component suppliers each for their specific component? I think that, I'm not sure, but I think that was more the question. Maybe you can answer that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also very good. I think it's also been linked to the decentralized approach. So maybe we have to separate, let's say, the technical level, who implements the IT technology, and who has the governance of the data which contain it in. First, my previous answer was related to the technical implementation. There may be service providers commissioned, for example, by the EU, who install the technology and operate them, maybe for a limited time. That's still to be defined. And when it comes to the data entered, and that's exactly the decentralized approach we heard of, meaning that the system should be not a central big database, but rather, for example, the manufacturers, or typically we talk about in eco-design definitions on the institution or person putting a product on the market. That's usually for the European regulation, the core responsible, let's say, person or institution. I think whoever it will be, the importer, the manufacturer, the trader, they have to enter the data in this decentralized system. And so I think it could be, for example, on their own servers, and the digital product passport system would draw the information then from this decentralized data storage from the manufacturer or the organization putting the product on the market. So it will not be most likely every component provider as it's today, but it's rather the final product more or less officially put on the European market.
Great, thank you so much, Thomas, and for all the questions, both online and in the room. I think we will get more opportunities for Q&A towards the end, so I think we ought to move swiftly on. And next, we've got a fabulous roundtable from businesses, and these are several of the members of the task force that obviously brought together this report today. So what we will do is try and go online first. And if that doesn't work, we'll go to Céline to try and sort it out. So perhaps if we go to Baijia and Jørgen online, and hopefully we can get them up. Yes. Here is okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Applause you.
Can you hear me too?
All right. Well, first, I want to say it's a very good and timely report, and it answers some burning questions on how the digital product passport can help facilitate circular economy in a different sector, and it really provides some really great concrete recommendations. So thank you for the opportunity to participate in this event and contribute to the report. And first of all, I want to also emphasize that our strong support for the digital product passport. ROCKWOOL welcomes different regulatory tools that supports our effort in achieving a net zero carbon and circular economy. And one of such tools, what we understand, is the digital product passport. It also helps the much needed digital transition in the construction industry. But in order to facilitate the circularity in construction, the digital product passport should contain the data beyond the life cycle assessment, such as the durability, recyclability, sorting, and collection instructions to avoid mixing materials at the end of life, and so on. So based on this assumption, I'd like to share three main points about the digital product passport from a construction material manufacturer's perspective. The first is that the DPP can help ensuring the green claims are credible and boost market surveillance. But in order for the DPP to succeed on that, the data quality and the verification must be ensured, no matter if it's mandatory or voluntary information. And this can be done, for example, via third-party verification of data and information by qualified verifier. And this kind of system already exists for at least the construction industry's environmental product declaration. And this can be of inspiration, of course, for the DPP. And this means widespread green claims, such as being recyclable, should be checked if the actual practice is taking place in the region and at scale. For example, through a dedicated recycling scheme, such as our ROCKWOOL. Meanwhile, aspirational green claims should be avoided if it cannot be verified. And my second point is about the data management, like Thomas already mentioned. As there are already several declarations in place for example, for different products, the digital product passport should be built upon existing systems. For example, the environmental product declaration, to ensure interoperability, data exchange, and avoid heavy burden on the manufacturers to declare the same data multiple times. So the digital product passport is definitely a step forward in the digital transition of the construction industry. And that's why several companies like us have been proactive and worked on digital tools for the environmental product declaration and the data template for BIM, building information modeling integration. However, it is a little bit uncertain still whether the EU construction product regulation will require a digital product passport, or will it link to the eco-design for sustainable product regulation approach. And this uncertainty prevents the construction material companies from investing time and resources into further developing anything similar to DPP. So this leads to my last point. We urgently need a clear direction from the Commission about the digital product passport, its data scope and coverage, so companies like us can start preparing our own digital systems to adapt the future. So thank you very much.
Baijia, and for keeping us so succinct. We will continue, and we'll have time to come back to this as well. Next, so I'll move swiftly on, and next move to Jørgen, who and thanks, because I think you're meant to be on holiday, so you've put some real commitment to be with us. So thank you. The floor is yours.
No worries, for King and Country and Hydro, of course. So sustainability manager located at Hydro's headquarters in Oslo, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and just want to echo mostly what has been said already. I think it's a timely and most useful report, and more importantly, maybe a timely and most useful process, both up to now and of course in the exciting times ahead. So mostly I'm here to listen and learn, but also happy to provide some thoughts from Hydro's side. So you may know that Hydro is a business-to-business company in the aluminum and energy sector, and we have this ability to, we span the value chain from the mine all the way to, semi-finished extruded profiles and also recycling. So since the aluminum is used in a wide variety of products, from those required in the green transition that you're discussing already, like solar panels, wind turbines, and electrical vehicles, it is also used in a wide range of everyday products: window frames, tech components, foil, planes, trains, and automobiles in general. So since it's a metal that's infinitely recyclable and also without losing its qualities in each round of these recycled processes, it's sort of natural for Hydro to welcome the European Commission's proposed regulation for eco-design for sustainable products and the digital passports in general. We see this as a very important step to help promote and what I would call a trusted baseline. I think trust is a key word that you touched upon already, but this trusted baseline that builds an access to quality data, which again can help drive the demands towards low carbon and circular products in a better way, right? There is a drive already, but there is also a lot of confusion. So more specifically, I think based on our own experience as well, I can get back to that a little bit, and like my predecessor said as well, we welcome any type of legislation, if it's a little bit flexible, of course, that will lend decision support both to our customers, right, when they have to choose, our downstream customers, but maybe importantly also to the conscious consumer, and sort of empowering them to make the sustainable choices in our daily lives. And I'm speaking about myself here as well. I'm fairly conscious, but I think it's hard to make a good decision when I'm faced with the choice of choosing product A or B, simply because it's really hard for me to filter the data, if they are at all available. So we have used similar ideas and technology in a variety of pilot projects as well, trying to promote, we've isolated it to sustainability improvements, but as you know better than me, any type of data can be transferred here. But sort of our improvements that we make, we push them down the value chain and exploring the possibilities of using, a product passport version 0.1 to see how the market and our customers can use verified and trusted information to sort of build their own sustainability case. Most specifically, trying to filter and eliminate the white noise of sustainability that we see so frequently happening. So based on our experience and tons of other experience with digital product passports and the likes, we very much welcome an initiative that you have put out here today. And of course, the details needs to be carved out, but like was said in the beginning, I think it's better to start, or Hydro think it's better to start small and scale up, and just by getting the bits and pieces of a common framework, because I think a framework that is sort of given by someone will not be suspected of having biases or self-interests that's sort of built into the framework to benefit one of the other parties. And I think, the Commission sits in a very good position to at least provide the details of that, the basic starting points, and that will create traction and movement in and by itself. So based on ours, and I'm sort of just repeating a lot of the things that has already been said, but I think it's worthwhile to repeat some of them. We of course have a wish list for the process, and I think the most important one is the need to harmonize the requirements. And I'm not that concerned, or we're not that concerned about what those requirements are, as long as there's a clear data governance and data model in place, which makes it really hard to misunderstand, intended or unintended misunderstand, and set up, the blueprint for the data carriers. And if you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 or multitude of those, as long as there's a white paper, there is sort of this is the way it's supposed to be done, most of the companies can adapt to that. So any type of standardization is usually a good thing, but it needs to be flexible, at least in the beginning, because we can always expand the data highway once we know the road, is heading in the right direction. So like was said before as well, make sure that the data we start with are relevant, and maybe even more important, that they are useful to the end customer, especially, because there's not a problem avalanching the end customer with data. The problem is to filter through and present data in a way that they can understand, trust and gives them support for the decisions they want to make. And also, of course, that spills into what has already been said. There will be data relevance that's different for different user groups, right? But that doesn't mean one shouldn't start and test, like you said, because I'm pretty sure that once we start rolling, at least based on our experience, it's easier to sort of identify the key pain points. And of course, it is about trust, I know. At the same time, we sort of see that just being transparent lends a little bit of trust in and by itself. I think that's important to notice, so we don't sort of dig ourselves into a big hole in terms of assurance and third-party verification. Veracity of the data, critical, we know. But in the beginning, as long as we know that we can verify it and audit it sufficiently, it's not perhaps the first step we need to take because it's highly complicated and probably will partly be addressed as more and more sensors are being utilized. That doesn't mean we don't think it's important, but it shouldn't be in the way of, getting the process rolling. And then, of course, the IPR issues are more of a limited concerns to Hydro, not as such. But I'm pretty sure that whatever type of IT security, admin rights, and access levers one has in a centralized system can be just as well built into a decentralized system. Or, flip it around. If they want to get into your IPR systems, they can probably do that to your centralized system as easily or as difficult as it is on a decentralized ledger technology. And of course, I think exploring incentive mechanisms, not only the mandatory ones, but how should we encourage the different parts of the value chain to onboard such a digital passport, construction or blueprint is also very important, right? Because by the end of the day, probably the further downstream you go and all the way up to the end consumer, there is a willingness to pay, or there's a customer stickiness to a brand, or you pay a premium. But that premium probably needs to filter all the way down to, to the mine, so to speak, in the aluminum industry, because you want to sort of tie the different bits and pieces together. Hydro can't deliver a sustainable solution unless we get sustainable solutions further upstream. So in short, I mean, obviously, you know better than me, the clarity and systems for data will always be hard. Anybody who has, work with computers know that there isn't I know that somebody said there is a silver bullet here, but I'm pretty sure that in terms of IT, it's not. But since it's hard anyway, we might as well start building and crossing that bridge now. And since this job is not done by any single entity or company, it's probably best if we agree on some sort of path or a map and start crossing these bridges together. That's basically what I wanted to say. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks, Jørgen. So I suggest we loop back around for questions if we've got time after this section. If not, we've got some time towards the back end of the event. But I will perhaps invite Céline from Saint-Gobain to take the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Tahmid. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Very inspiring thoughts already shared. Saint-Gobain is a global multi-material construction product manufacturer. You know us for insulation, glass, gypsum, mortars, also construction and chemicals. So we look at this from a holistic perspective. And today I'd like to share with you three main thoughts why we welcome this move and why it's needed to accelerate on sustainability, data, and digitalization. Then I would elaborate a little bit on that interaction between products and buildings data, because we look at digital product passport in two ways. Products are one way, but building is also a product in itself. And I'll share some thoughts on what we see as indispensable, as needed to evolve this ecosystem in the construction sector. So why? So in Saint-Gobain, we've engaged for a while in transparency. We believe really that transparency is at the core of sustainability in the sector, and the sector is a challenge because of the multiplicity of actors interacting with us as product manufacturers. So we started early. Today we have over 1,500 EPDs, so environmental product declaration from our various products and solutions. And why we have done this is to anticipate and to facilitate the uptake of sustainability requirements by other actors, but also to meet regulatory requirements. For example, in France, the new called RE 2020 calls for buildings to express and to disclose their performance in terms of environmental sustainability, carbon, to start with carbon, and that calls for having those data at product level. So this interaction is very much there, and it's very much, I would say, an ecosystem in the making. It's about making the life of others easier to progress on their sustainability journey. We will cover all of our product range with EPDs by 2030. And yes, in the meantime, we also recognize the challenge to organize with other actors to structure, to consolidate the data availability, the reliability, and also the comparability, because we have to face also different program operators. So then moving on why why it's important, and it's very much at stake to enable the integration of data between buildings and products, and what ESPR or SPI, the construction product regulation, can help. So the primary level at which we consider sustainability is the building level. It's where products, systems, solutions are being compared. It's where demand is being expressed, and we've seen that with energy performance first, and now it is evolving. So we see bits and pieces of this broader approach being installed through the EU taxonomy, but also through the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which calls for whole life carbon disclosure, which will then call for a better knowledge of different products and solution footprints. So that is interaction which is very very important. So it's at this building level that the data will be integrated, then using specific product data. So we can also conceive the digital product passport as a building logbook. So there are also discussions around that. A building logbook that would be the memory of the building, that would integrate elements to drive circularity. You know how many times some materials would have been in use and how long, if they have been reused already, and at which point maybe you need to do something else with them. So that's important. You also integrate safety, but also sub items like renovation passport. So that's one dimension. But to feed that, we need better information on product, and that's where that makes sense. So on this, we understand that the digital product passport for construction product would start with what we call DOP, DOC, Declaration of Performance, Declaration of Conformity. But then we can also integrate other elements, and it will feed together with what we call PIM, Product Information Management, into data system and models that then are used at building level. And that's where you can create twin and project basically all what's in a building and can be recycled, reused, or used for other purposes. So this interaction is really important to capture at this moment, and this is why we understand, but we're also waiting further clarification. I echo what Baijia was saying regarding a digital product passport for the construction product sector. Then regarding the ecosystem and what we think will help, I mean, sort of key success factor is that, yes, we hear about a European database for construction product that has been mentioned. This is in itself a challenge, so we understand it will be fed by information included on the Declaration of Performance, Declaration of Conformity. It will need to be fed by enough data. So basically, here we see our challenge and the opportunity as a manufacturer to feed, to inform, to plan for data production on our side, and that is a capacity dimension as well. To produce the data and then to update it also. This ecosystem will need to be sufficiently harmonized. So that's then the link with existing standards. So we have standards for expressing life cycle impact on products, EN 15804, it's been revised at building level as well. So those two needs to be the basic framework in order to feed the data in a coherent manner. and to have the possibility to compare then products and buildings with each other. So sufficiently harmonized, but with also a level of flexibility to feel to meet local needs. And it will also be, let's not hide it, a matter of cost and resources to feed the system. Then to the database, further discussion will happen with the Commission, with all the stakeholders, alongside discussion on the construction product regulation. With whom, what language, for example, would it be? I mean, it's a very diverse world with lots of SMEs, so let's keep that in mind. Interoperability will be key for building this ecosystem. And it needs to progress step by step with sufficient digitalization at all along the journey. EPDs are to some extent only based on PDF documents, so you need to feed the data, to feed the database with digital data at first in order to have that flexible outcome. And yes, keeping the user needs in mind. And then I would also maybe, as a last word regarding key dimension to keep in mind to move this digital ecosystem for construction product is this capacity building. We will need it for private stakeholders, but also in public authorities, local authorities. So we need to plan ahead. We need to train people. The resources are scarce. I mean, we see points of acceleration in a number of countries, and that needs to be organized. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Céline, and thank you to Baijia and Jørgen as well. I think it's really great to get that in-depth perspectives from businesses, and just to hear it, because I think sometimes we can go quite theoretical with these things, but to see the actual practical implications, that's something that we try to underpin with the report as well, with working through workshops. So great to kind of have you and hear that. So I think it's time to move on to the views from the European Parliament and the Commission. And maybe actually, if it's okay with you, William, I might come to you first, if that's okay. And yeah, just to kind of get your reflections.
Well, thank you very much, Tahmid, and thank you. Those are really fascinating perspectives from industry, and congratulations on a really excellent report. I mean, it's well written, it's very well balanced. It brings in the sort of academic and the business perspectives in a very policy relevant way. And also it's fantastically timed, and I think timing is everything in these. We've been talking about the digital product passport, as you mentioned in the report. You give a bit of the history. 2014 we had the European Resource Sufficiency Panel. We had 4 MEPs on it from 4 different groups. We had 4 ministers, we had business, we had academics. It was chaired by a former Irish Prime Minister. So we already had a fairly solid and widespread support for the idea at the time. The time wasn't ripe. In the meantime, we've had various voluntary private attempts at doing passports, which are generally fairly young, but shown really already the concept works, that it's not that expensive, and that the business case is there. We've had Council conclusions calling for the passport. We've had parliamentary resolutions calling for the passport. And then with the European Green Deal, we actually got the sort of mandate to do it. And the whole idea of having the green and digital twin drivers for growth and for recovery. This is really sort of epitome of it, because it brings the green and the digital together. So we've got an amazing degree of consensus. So we brought forward the idea in the Circular Economy Action Plan, as you said, a couple of years ago. The question is how to do it, and I think the way that we've done it is also smart, in the sense that we've taken eco-design, which is a very working and proven basis. It's proved phenomenal impact in terms of energy savings. I think is it 220 or 250 euros per household savings in energy. So just in the current context, I mean, with energy prices at the moment, that's probably higher. So it certainly works. It's a means of bringing together the collective consumer power of the 450 million consumers, providing a level playing field approach. So it has a lot to a lot going for it, and the idea of expanding that to wider circularity and sustainability objectives was smart, I think. The recognition that design is the crucial stage for sustainability, for impacts both upstream and downstream was clear. And I think the innovative part of it was to add in, I mean, of course, we've widened the scope of the eco-design approach, we've widened the criteria for the sort of physical requirements, but the really innovative part was bringing in the data requirements and the idea of the digital product passport. The idea has been explained as you showed, Thomas, on your infographic. It's really that products on their journey through the economy, they lose data, which means they lose value. And as circular economy, the fundamental definition of circular economy is about retaining value of the materials and products as they move through the economy. It was clear that we had to include data and not just physical attributes. And for that, I think we have to look at it in 3 phases. You have to look at the sort of resource efficiency. So you have to look at getting more out of the materials that come into the economy. You have to look at the recycling and the quality as well as the quantity of recycling, which I think is in things like steel is extremely important, which is when the product leaves the economy, it's no longer functional. But thirdly, and extremely importantly, is the prolonging the lifetime of the product in the economy on the basis of what you don't waste, you don't have to replace, what you don't throw away, you don't have to then extract, process, and so on for the materials. So the challenge that we've had is that it's never been done before, and I laughed when I saw the title of one of the sections when I got to it in the report, which is what remains unknown about the DPP. And it's never been done before. As I said, the technology exists, the business case is fairly clear, but of course there is a need to develop an open, interoperable system for it to be based on, one that will allow interoperability on across product groups, so sort of on a horizontal basis as well as along the value chains. And we need an open and fair process for establishing the data requirements. So we need the sort of the governance, the procedure to work. But now we've got 2 years to get it right. Well, maybe depending on how quickly things go through the co-decision. But I think it's important to understand that in that time, in that window of opportunity, and as I say, congratulations for getting this report in now, because it's really a good point in the debate to really to start looking at these things. But we have 3 milestones in the operationalization of the digital product passport. We adopted the proposal for a regulation, as you said, at the end of March, and that set out the concepts, the main principles, the scope and some of the key features of the product passport, and that again is still subject to change because of the co-decision, the legislative procedure. But of course, it left quite a few ambiguities on the actual arrangements and the system architecture and so on. The second is the identification of the essential requirements, where we leave this to the standardization process. I was trying to remember which article it is in the proposal. I think it's 11, but I might be wrong. So we leave it to the standardization process with the kind of safety clause. So if what is developed isn't fit for purpose, we have the possibility to come in with specifications for technical requirements. And then of course there's the delegated acts, so the whole process of product group by product group or potentially horizontal also requirements being developed. Although there is that ambiguity, there are some key features which are clear, and I think this hopefully clears up and reassures on some of the issues which are raised in the report. So we're clear that we need to have non-proprietary solutions when it comes to the systems. We need to open, standardized, interoperable formats. On the level of granularity, as you responded already, and I think you're quite right, when it comes to certain product groups, there will be more of a need for individual physical product identification, maybe because dynamic data is important, as with batteries. But I think on many products, batch or model level granularity would be enough. On access rights, we went for the need to know basis. I'm not sure how that compares with what you call the transparency as a default. Be interesting to discuss on that. But of course, there need to be different levels of access for business, consumer, and government actors, and that is clear. On the liability, that also came up already. It is the operator that places a product on the market that will be responsible for the data, and we also specify the possibility of having unique identifiers for other operators. So for facilities and operators that might come in along the journey of the product as it goes through the on its journey. So I think in the report we've really hit the nail on the head on very many of the issues. You've identified the right challenges, whether it's the coherence and consistency, whether it's the flexibility and exploration, whether it's the transparency and accountability. Just to focus on a couple of little things, I think it's clear that we will need to start small. We have to be moderate in our initial ambitions, especially when you consider the amount of data that's out there, which is expected to quadruple in the next 5 years or so. So we really need to focus on the important stuff. And we expect to be mostly talking about existing data and really not trying to burden with extra data. As I said already, I think it's clear that we're not only talking about the vertical product group. We need to also look at some horizontal criteria. And I think the example that you have in the report from the construction case study shows that for something like durability in construction products, there's maybe sense in having a more horizontal approach, whereas for other kinds of criteria, there might be more interest in having a more vertical approach. Just to conclude with a sort of bigger picture thing, I see this really as being about data for action. It's not data for knowledge, it's not data for reporting. It's really trying to establish a framework for things to work in the economy. It's really about doing that. And I think that I think it's Jørgen that said that the Commission is in a position to convene and arbitrate and to provide the possibilities for that to happen in the public interest. And here we're really talking about going beyond what is achievable and is being achieved to a certain extent in business to business voluntary approaches by having these sort of public interest objectives. We'll be able to bridge some of the split incentives that are existing in supply chains. We'll be able to ensure that there are open and interoperable systems, which wouldn't necessarily happen in a sort of proprietary and restricted atmosphere, and use our convening and regulatory power to do that. But I think also the fact of establishing that will, as you said, Thomas, lead to many more voluntary and additional possibilities. So whatever we make obligatory and agree on through the delegated acts and particular requirements, I think that the existence of an interoperable and standardized system will really open up many more possibilities for business to business collaboration to reduce friction costs in the economy, to have a better idea of residual value of products as they go through. So then you can look at the business opportunities for capturing that value, circular business opportunities, and creating closed loops and so on. I think it's important that we don't let the many technical challenges that we'll have in the next couple of years get in the way of the bigger message of it's good to see it coming through today. The report itself says that the digital product passport could be a game changer. Silver bullet, I don't know, but a game changer. But we need to keep the eye on that goal. We need to see it in the perspective of wider things like the taxonomy, green public procurement, and many other things that are going on. And I think in that sense, it's very important that in the Council and in the Parliament, there is good collaboration between the different bodies, the different working parties and council formations and the different committees, because it isn't just about environment, it isn't just about single market, it's also about consumers, it's about the many things that come into it, and it's very important that we manage to bring those together. So just to conclude, I mean, I talked about the green and digital twins, and many of you will have heard the Kranzberg's first law of technology, which is that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. And I think the empowering potential of digital technologies is huge, but it can be used to empower unsustainable and linear consumption production just as easily as circularity. So it's really what we're trying to do here is create the framework and the policy framework and standards and so on to make sure that those potentials, that capacity, enabling capacity, does send us in a sustainable route.
Fabulous. That was really comprehensive and great. I'll move swiftly on just so that we can try and have any time for questions towards the end as well. So I'll pass quickly to Jakop Dalunde, MEP.
Thanks, Tahmid. I'm delighted that we as a society have finally started to take climate change seriously and starting to address it, even though we are quite far from actually doing anything enough about it in terms of what the science tells us to do. The problem, though, is that climate change is not the only planetary boundary that we as humanity are doing our very best to threaten. It's biodiversity, functioning ecosystems, water scarcity, resource scarcity, acidification, and the list goes on. And I'm not even certain that climate change will be the easiest of those to tackle. Others might even be more difficult than climate change. And I'm also quite worried that we are doing some work now to try to stop climate change, but doing that in a way that actually makes the other planetary boundaries more difficult to manage. One example of this is that the extraction, production, and processing of materials is responsible for 90% of the biodiversity loss and water stress. It is also responsible for 16% of climate emissions. So even though we have some kind of discussions of maybe we shouldn't fly as much, which is responsible for about 5% of emissions, we are doing very little to handle those 16% of climate emissions that comes from resource extraction. The other year, I was working on battery regulation, trying to make that more circular, given that we need to have more electrification of our road transports, and that requires much more batteries. As we know, the resource extractions for those raw materials that go into our batteries have quite a bit of problems, social problems, environmental problems, and so on. And I was quite shocked when I was starting to work on battery regulation, how that recycling process actually works. Because of the lack of actual information of the contains of those batteries, many of the recyclers actually just melt them and do their best to maybe extract some of the materials, and the rest is just waste. But I was equally shocked with the actually quite resistance from large parts of the stakeholders in trying to do something about that, trying to implement some of the principles of DPP into that battery regulation, making sure that it's much easier to actually recycle the raw materials in those batteries. We see a fantastic development right now in terms of the uptake of the market of battery electric cars in Sweden, my country. Over half of the newly sold cars are actually rechargeable, which is fantastic. However, the limiting factor in my perception of the rollout of EVs will actually be resources that we can socially, environmentally accept the extraction of. That will be the limiting factor. So I'm quite skeptical. I don't understand why the stakeholders in the car industry are not as keen as humanly possible to make sure that we can recycle the batteries as much as we can. This telephone, for example, I'm a technology enthusiast, so I like to buy new technology as often as it is possible, and that's all very nice. But much of the resources in these telephones and many of our other electronics, the resource extraction for them are quite difficult to manage. Now, my company of choice to purchase telephones, Apple, are doing at least some good work in their own recyclability of telephones. They now have robots that can identify which iPhone is it. They know the contents of that telephone, and they can then recycle those materials quite efficiently. So even though they don't do that on the other products, which is what we need, that is an example of how much better we can be in recycling products when we actually know the contents of them and don't just melt them and hope for the best in terms of the recyclement. So I really hope that we can get some more political support in realizing the importance of proper implementation of DPP. And I will be working on this very topic in the upcoming work on eco-design. I will be the shadow rapporteur for the Greens, and I will do my best to have such a ambitious implementation of DPP in that as I can. I am, however, quite worried of the lack of crisis insight from many of my colleagues. So I really urge you all, both here in the room and those listening, to try to reach out to my colleagues and make them understand, because I don't necessarily think that this is a matter of ideology. I think most members of the other ideological perspectives will come to the realization of the importance of DPP if they only have proper crisis insight. But that needs to happen, and I will leave it at that, not to take the time of my colleagues. Thanks, Tahmid.
Thank you very much. And really great to get that perspective, particularly with the batteries as well. Well, hopefully we can get. Oh yes, you're on the screen, Valeria. Great. I'll pass to you, and yeah, it would be great to get your insights from ECOS, and what we like to do is kind of get that slightly more external perspective. So it'd be great to kind of get your views of what we've talked about today.
Yes, thank you very much all, and such an interesting discussion today. Again, a very timely and definitely interesting report. For the one that do not know us, ECOS is the Environmental Coalition on Standards. Sorry. We're an NGO that is specialized on environmental legislation, and we have two hats. We work on advocacy, and we work on standardization. So standards, a word that has been thrown in the mix quite a lot today as well. And we have a 20 years background in working on eco-design and its policy framework. So one of the successes that Mr. Neale was pointing out in his speech earlier. From our point of view, of course, digital product passport is a centerpiece to the circular economy, because we see that insufficient information on chemical content, material composition, repairability, performance, recyclability, waste streams still remain a big bottleneck when it comes to sustainability and when it comes to circularity. And we see that the lack of information makes it even harder for those to be exploited for business and sustainability purposes. So, of course, what again William was saying about data for action. So the traceability and having more and more information will just help to improve circular suggestions and hopefully circular decision making throughout the value chain as well. Improving the optimization of circular operation and support hopefully the fulfillment of all the regulatory and compliance needs for products. Of course, information requirements need to be mandatory, properly enforced, and these could create an incentive to make more sustainable choices. And the DPP has clearly a potential to create those opportunities. So we welcome everything that the SPR and its take on the DPP as a step forward, because indeed, as also was mentioned earlier, we need to address the EU material footprint, its impact on land, on water, on climate, which is fueled by Europe's unsustainable production and consumption pattern. So from our point of view, its success depends on 2 points, of course. 2 factors. One is the level of ambition that will be pushed forward when it comes to getting the SPR out of the co-decision procedure, but also the level of ambition of the delegated act, and then the time frame also for adopting those delegated acts. We have a very big, long wish list, as everybody in this room possibly, on what we would see the DPP cover, but we believe that, I mean, no data, no market principle, and as you know, this is a principle taken from REACH, meaning that no substances that can be manufactured, used, or imported within the European Union without registration within ECA. And this principle should be mainstreamed, and a mandatory digital product passport should be introduced for all products. So again, information requirements need to be combined with the performance requirements, and ambitious performance requirement that would focus first and foremost to prolong the lifetime of products. They should be used to generate data that are needed to accelerate the phase out of unsustainable products. And it can be used to understand better product performances and what is needed to improve them. So all the information about hotspots and how to move them and well, mitigate them. The digital product passport, of course, should be open and accessible to all relevant actors, including repairers, market surveying authorities, and to some degree the consumer as well. And the data accessibility needs to be guaranteed. For us, DPP should not be, of course, applied to isolated sector only. And the rule of thumb is quite simple. So the more you use it, the more impactful you will have. And I was very happy as well to see that no proprietary solution will be allowed, as was mentioned earlier, and that the DPP should be built to facilitate effective verification of compliance. What you have in your report as well is quite a lot of information about how to add additional information to the DPP, like the corporate CSR reporting data, modern slavery, child labor. So once we start and we do step by step, as was said, but this can create the framework to be future-proof as well. And then to conclude, I mean, yes, transparency is definitely an important aspect of the question, but bringing society and the economy back within planetary boundaries need to be the overall aim of those policies. We know that this is enshrined in the Green Deal with the ambitions of a EU circular and climate neutral, non-toxic economy. So let's keep that in mind when setting up those next steps. And again, sustainability, traceability, transparency are key, and not addressing it properly throughout the value chain is a huge risk, and it's a huge business risk, it's a huge reputational risk. And yeah, as said, we need data for action. And we cannot wait any longer. What I've heard from today, I mean, IP should not really be used as a barrier to water down digital product passport and ESPR ambitions, especially if we go towards more query-related functionalities. As you know, the way they seem to be going is queries rather than access to data within a couple of ISO standards that are on the table right now. So that could work. And of course, to conclude, we feel that it's a very, very promising tool. We've heard it many times today, the silver bullet or the game changer. It needs to be fully deployed to be effective. And the Commission has set a rather high ambition, and we really hope to see that ambition continue where the process continues. And that's it from my side.
we're coming up on time, but would love to have an opportunity for questions. So what I might do is invite the people who were online to also be present. Are there any questions on the room? So I see one. I'll go to the lady closer to me first, if that's okay. And if you could just introduce yourself as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thanks a lot for inviting. My name is Laure Wagner. I work at the Luxembourg Permrep, and I'd like to thank you for an excellent report and presentation as well. I want to make it short. I have two questions, maybe addressed to both the representatives from business that have given some very interesting insights, as well as to the policymakers on the panel. The report, and as we understand the new proposal, both aim at products placed on the market in terms of scope, and thereby question, do we exclude half-finished products in the DPP, and therefore also the B2B dimension? Is the goal to target more products that are in the B2C fields, and if so, how does this articulate with sort of this phased or gradual approach that that we understand we're going to take, and why was this choice made to exclude products that are circulating in a B2B context mostly? Now, that's the first question. And the second question is maybe more for the Commission, linking this back to the currently applicable Eco-Design Directive and the energy consumption label. Is the goal ultimately at the very end of our phase and gradual approach to have a similar label for circularity, i.e. I buy a fridge and my fridge tells me this is this much circular, on top of all the other information that the fridge will need to tell me from other sectorial legislation? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So I think there was two sets of questions there. So the first one was to business representatives. We've got Céline in the room, and then Baijia and Jørgen online. So I don't know if there's anyone particular who might want to take this, and if so, taking it quite briefly. Would you be happy to, Céline? Okay.
I mean, very briefly, and I'm happy to dig further into the topic. I mean, in the construction world, there's lots of business to business. So I would not think that requirements linked to digitalization and product passport that would then apply to construction product, so linked to CPR, that there would be such exemptions. So I don't think that's the mindset here, but happy to hear further clarifications maybe from other stakeholders. Thanks.
Thanks, Céline. Baijia or Jørgen, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I definitely totally agree with what Céline was saying. ROCKWOOL, for example, also sells a lot to B2B. So that's why I also think digital product passport can give also very valuable information to the B2B approach. But also that's exactly where we can have a lot of values, differentiate what when it's a valuable reclaimed material from waste, which just gonna be landfilled. So I do think there is still a lot of value in kind of having the B2B included in the digital product passport.
I just want to say that, you know, I agree on that as well. And I think for practical purposes, you know, whoever, you know, puts together the end product will probably just turn around and ask the upstream participants to provide the data sets anyway, right? So we are an integrated part of it, and we want to be an integrated part of it. And it becomes particularly important if we start touching upon all the other elements. I mean, if you just, there are many other types of data sets that you can envision once you have an infrastructure in place, looking at, you know, could be tax issues, could be, you know, license issues, could be a lot of different issues that is equally relevant for the B2B segment. So I'm pretty sure that we would love to be part of the ride if we can, at least.
Who would like to take that? William?
Thank you. I mean, on the first part, I think I would agree with what was just said, that we expect the digital product passport to enable business to business, upstream and downstream, sort of post-sale and pre-sale. On the labeling, idea. I mean, eco-design continues as we go forward in the next 2 years, bringing the eco-design for sustainable products regulation as it goes through co-decision. The eco-design as it exists now continues, and the energy performance classes will continue. You can see that they're in, I think it's Article 14 of the proposal. We have proposals on labels, and we're also developing a repairability index, which could eventually be done through the passport. But I think that also there's an important link to, when you're talking about the sort of consumer interface, there's an important link with the Green Claims Initiative in terms of being able to verify claims on products. And I think that consumers are bombarded with information as it is, and they don't want more data. I mean, if you're looking, I've heard that it takes about 2 seconds to make a default choice in a supermarket on which shampoo you're going to buy, for example. And I think that the real interest will be in third parties being able to provide targeted information to consumers over their choices, so that you'll be able to use algorithms to really point people into the direction of the choice which reflects most their own principles, whether they're more interested in climate, biodiversity, child labour, or whatever it might be. And I expect that in addition to the sort of the labelling aspect, the possibilities for providing consumers with targeted information will be huge.
Great. Sorry, I know there was a lot more questions that were probably coming through, but we are already past time, I suppose. So I'll pass to Jakop Dalunde for final remarks, and then there's a few logistical things I'll say.
Thanks, Tahmid. One of the things that I have realized after now my 15 years in professional politics is that one of the limiting factors is political bandwidth or capacity. The political system cannot do everything at once. There are limitations, especially with quite technical matters like this, on how much we can do at once, which means that especially for my colleagues in the Commission, but also here in the European Parliament, if we want an ambitious implementation of DPP that has a wider scope than maybe only the manufactured goods, but also including the entire value chain, then we need this item to be higher up politically on the agenda, so that it takes priority over other issues. Other issues are also equally important, but maybe if we truly believe that this is one of the silver bullets that can make the circular economy happen much more quicker, then it needs higher priority. That is why we really need your help. Oftentimes business asks from politics what they need from us, but we are quite quickly coming to a stage where we, in the political side, need the help of business to try to raise awareness on the importance of handling issues like this that are quite technical, that don't get a lot of voters. I have an election coming up in Sweden now in September, and if I go out campaigning and claiming I'm going to introduce a digital product passports, that's not going to net me any voters. Unless there is a big societal demand, unless companies get out and start to talk about the importance of actually having a circular economy and what we need in order to have that. So that will be my final words. We need your help in raising the awareness on this issue. Talk about it and make sure that we get the political bandwidth in order to have an ambitious implementation of DPP in the eco-design, but also in the other various legislations that we have upcoming in the coming months and years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it's been a great event. And I'd like to quickly thank all the speakers, particularly Jakop Dalunde, for hosting us, as well as his office for kindly supporting. I think we still had 140 viewers towards the end, so maybe there are a few more people that are interested in DPP, our voters. Who knows?
Anybody voting in Sweden?
Yeah. So just some quick thanks because we want to finish promptly. So thank you all for listening and those online. Thank you to our live streamers, lots of colleagues from CISL. Indeed, we have a birthday from our team, so what an exciting day to release a report. And also just final things, you can see on the screen there, you can check out our reports, just scan the code. In terms of logistics, we need to be out of this room by 12, and we need to be escorted for those that don't have a badge. So we'll just need to be quite prompt to that. And last but not least, in fact, the most important, please do take a croissant on your way out. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll be hearing from you all soon, I hope.